Greetings, everybody. This is Kate Hurley, co-founder of the Million Cat Challenge. I'm so happy to see a whole bunch of you here today, including a lot of old friends and some new names in our lineup of attendees. We love this topic and we love the Million Cat Challenge because it's brought forward all these different ways of providing positive outcomes for cats. And one way, of course, is to get a cat back to the home that it had in the first place through return to owner, or better yet, helping owners find their lost cats so that they bypass the shelter entirely. So here to lead us in this exciting discussion is Brigid Wasson, lifetime animal welfare professional and shelter director. But before we get started, just wanted to take a moment to thank Maddie, as always, for being such an incredible partner. As many of you may have heard, it's been a big week here in Million Cat Land, and if you don't know or somehow missed my incredibly corny video that I sent you all last week, do check out the Million Cat Counter at millioncatchallenge.org, and if you want to find out even more about that, click on the counter and it'll bring you to a whole thing from me and Julie about it. So thanks so much for all of you and for Maddie's. And just want to remind you as we wheel into the webinar, do feel free to ask questions throughout the entire webcast. We love hearing from you. Just type them in the chat box as they occur to you. We'll queue them up for the end. And if you run out of time and have to jump off before the Q&A session has ended, don't worry. We are recording this presentation, so you can always revisit it later. Okay, so with that, back to our presenter. Brigid became interested in lost pet prevention and recovery in 2008 when she discovered Missing Pet Partnership, and in 2014 was invited to join the board of directors. She currently serves as president of the organization and manages the animal shelter initiatives, including Mission Reunite, which teaches animal shelter management staff, volunteers, and community partners to work together to increase owner reunions and decrease shelter intake. Getting pets back home quickly saves resources that can be better utilized for animals truly in need of a new home, such as cruelty or neglect cases. Brigid lives in Sonoma County, California, and is the CEO and principal consultant of the Path Ahead Animal Shelter Consulting, or PASC, if you want to turn that into an acronym. And without further ado, take it away, Brigid. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Dr. Hurley, all your associates at the Million Cat Challenge, Maddie's, and everyone who has made this webinar and this whole initiative possible. It has been an amazing week for us, and I'm really pleased to be with all of you here in the audience today to talk about my favorite subject, missing pets, or the finding of missing pets. So that's me. Many of you have met me in person or seen me speak, so we don't need to look at my face for too long. We'll get right to the subject. So in my years in animal shelters, I saw thousands upon thousands of cats coming in, not being reclaimed, and for many years I assumed that they were unwanted. But I started to question that after a while, and especially getting involved with Missing Pet Partnership. Started to ask, why are so many of these once loved pets, well cared for cats and other animals, why are they never found and reclaimed? Millions of animals go missing in the U.S., and the majority of them will never see home again. So they end up either being kept by people who found them, absorbed into free roaming populations, or ending up in shelters to any of several fates. Because the majority of these cats, other than underage kittens, are adult strays. There are some owner surrenders and other reasons why cats end up in shelters, but the vast majority, if you talk to any shelter director, are just strays, cats that people simply picked up because they meant well and thought they were in need of assistance and brought them to a shelter. And you have to figure that the majority of these cats are most likely owned. So it's easy to say what other people should do, but more important for us as professionals to say, what can we do differently? How can we change this situation? So there are a few reasons I've discovered in my research and getting to know people on this topic as to why this is so. And I don't have all the answers, but at least I have a few areas where we can start working on. One of the problems is that missing pet behavior is not known, and that's something we'll talk about today. So when an owner loses a cat, They don't know what to do. They may not even know that the cat is lost. So the owner's behavior and the behavior of the people around them are a factor. People who find cats are also a factor. They may not know what to do. They may take action that they believe is right, but actually hinders the cat getting back home. And then if some of you have seen me speak about the barriers to owner reclaim, animal shelter practices create many barriers for owners to come in and get their cats back. So let's talk a little bit about history. And some folks will ask me, well, why do we want to talk about the past? I'd want to talk about what we're doing now. But it's really important to understand where we have come from so that we know why we have the practices we have today. Because most times when you ask someone in a shelter, why do you do this or that, the answer is because that's the way we've always done it. Or there may be some reason that they come up with that's not really logical, that's not really based on today's best practices. So animal control and management departments largely were created to manage dogs. And this was back in the day when dogs were largely roaming. Many people lived on farms. Populations were lower in the United States and concentrated in certain areas. So the concerns for people about animals were dogs biting people, spreading rabies, and killing livestock. So these were the things that the public were concerned with, and this is why these animal control departments were created, largely by state and local governments. But cats pretty much weren't on the radar. They were just kind of there in the background, killing mice, living on farms, living in the cities and the stables, especially when we used horses for transportation. And interestingly, as things changed over the years, ironically, when cats started to be seen as more of a household pet that shouldn't be allowed to roam, that should be taken care of and in the house and brought to shelters, things got much worse for the cats. And so when someone saw a cat outside, they didn't just look the other way. They'd think, oh, this cat needs to be rescued. I need to take it to a shelter. And if you're involved in the Million Cat Challenge for more than 10 minutes, you'll know what happens next. So often the outcome for the cats is not good and has not been good for many, many years. So these early animal shelters, which many of them are still pretty much the same way they were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, were designed for dogs. And you can see this clearly. You walk into 4 out of 5 older shelters, and you'll see some sort of an office or an old house with some dog kennels attached to it. That's basically how they're designed. They were designed for holding dogs. Cat rooms are basically other rooms that have been repurposed. You can clearly tell that they used to be a storage room, somebody's office, or a broom closet. And somebody rolled some cages in there one fine day and said, this is the cat room. And unfortunately, many cats are still housed this way today in rooms that aren't designed for animals to live in, that don't have adequate ventilation or other things that they need for their optimal health. So let's talk about some shelter practices that are based on assumptions rather than facts. And these are some of the assumptions that are common in our Sorry about that, I just lost my connection. So we were talking about free roaming cats, and the reality is that many many people let their cats outside, for better or worse. Now, we recommend that people keep their cats on their property for their safety, but in reality, many people do not. And of course, there are community cats who have multiple owners, feeders, etc. Many cats that are reclaimed in shelters were actually picked up in front of their own home. And I have found this in working with various shelters that are focusing on their practices for cat reclaims. And when they're able to spend more time talking to people and they're able to do more reclaims, we start to learn about what is actually happening out there in the world rather than just believing these assumptions. There's that word, irresponsible. For many years, and I was just as guilty as the next person in animal sheltering. We talked about those irresponsible pet owners, okay? But now we know that I realize that some people are irresponsible or don't take the greatest care of their animals, but we need to start from a place that all people are good, want their cats, and want to take care of them, and certainly want the opportunity to find and reclaim them. But in reality, many people don't know about animal shelters. We know because that's our world. This is what we do every day, day in and day out. But your average person, it's not that difficult to get a cat. You can find one in the bushes. You can get one from the internet. Somebody will give you one. This is how many people get their cats and kittens, not necessarily by adopting from a shelter. So when their cat goes missing, that's not the first place they think of going. Timing is also a huge issue. Many owners don't start looking right away, especially for a cat. I can't tell you how many times I did a lost cat tour in the shelter, and I would always ask, when did your cat go missing? Oh, about 2 weeks ago. When did you start looking? Well, just today. You know, he usually wanders around and visits people, and so there's not the urgency that there would be if you came home and your dog were missing. And as I mentioned earlier, there are many barriers to reclaim. So it's not that people aren't trying to find and reclaim their cat. They're just not able to. So this is a big one. The shelter is the safest place for a cat. And we are to blame for promoting this image. For decades, we've been advertising, adopt, don't shop. Don't be part of the problem, be part of the solution, spay and neuter. We've been putting out this massive marketing campaign for decades that shelters are good, and this is where we need to bring animals so they can be rescued, so they can be safe. Now, there's certainly a place for animal shelters in the community, but it's not necessarily a place where we want to just bring every cat. We all know that the main cause of medical and behavioral problems in animal shelters is stress. And for us, in our lives, in everyone's life, stress can be a killer. So the shelter is also the least likely place where the owner is going to find their cat, with short hold periods, with these antiquated facilities. And I don't want anyone to think that I'm being down on animal shelter workers and leaders. Certainly not. Most of the folks out there are good and caring and want the best for these animals, but they're not aware of all these issues. They're not aware of all these barriers, which is why it's so important for us to educate the folks in shelters and the cat owners. So this is a big one. Impounding cats helps control their population. So this is something that many people believe and that I believed many years ago, and many other good people did as well, that if we didn't pick up all these cats and euthanize feral cats, and that populations would explode. It would be completely out of control. It would be so much worse than it is today. But guess what? That is absolutely false. Shelters don't take in more than 5% of the animals in their community. And with cats, realistically, it's probably more like 1 to 3%, because nobody actually knows how many cats are out there. These figures are based on owned animals, pet cats. And any wildlife biologist will tell you that there's various formulas The last time I gave a talk and mentioned this, my 70% figure was questioned. So I make no guarantees that is an exact number. But talk to any wildlife biologist and they will tell you that to reduce a free roaming and free breeding population, you would have to remove a significant amount of that population. 70% is the figure I have. I heard another figure that was something like 50% every year for a certain amount of years. A huge percent of the population, far more than half, year after year after year. But all we're taking in is less than 5%. So no matter what we do, unless we are doing targeted spay-neuter programs, that population is not going to change. So how's that working for us? Okay, it's not working very well. Across the country, the cat reclaim rates are very poor, 2% or less for most shelters. I conducted a study in 2014 of shelters in Northern California where I live and found those numbers to be pretty abysmal across the board. 3 reclaims out of 2,700, 18 reclaims out of 4,300. Now, underage kittens will skew those numbers, of course, but even if you take out the kittens, it's still not going to be a great figure. Because without proactive programs, nothing is going to change. Another factor here, which I discovered when I first started working with Maddie's fund, back when I was in the coalition in Santa Clara County, I was managing our statistics, and I would sit there and work on these spreadsheets until my eyes bled. And I started to see some patterns. And one of those was that we were not adopting out more than 50% of our incoming animals. Now, that's not to say we were euthanizing 50%. They had other positive outcomes, whether own or reclaim, small, but it was there, going to foster, going to a rescue group, or being transferred to another shelter in better hopes of being adopted in a different venue. So we were just shifting the problem around. These were positive outcomes, but they weren't permanent outcomes. So we are certainly in favor of any kind of adoption program, promotion, etc. But you just need to be aware that that is not the only answer. We're full. How many times have you heard that? We're full, throwing your hands up, tearing your hair out. Okay, I get it. When you're overburdened, you can hear all this great advice, but you can't deal with it right now. This is why it's good that we have this talk going into winter, because we all know that this is the time to plan for next spring. But the good news is that shelters implementing even one new best practice or two are going to see results. And that's what I want to get across, is that everything doesn't have to be perfect. Nothing is ever 100%. But whatever you do, any change, if there's a 5% improvement, that's an improvement. Roanoke Park Animal Shelter is one that I like to hold up. They have a very proactive missing pet program, and they do a number of things, including microchipping and tag at reclaim for both cats and dogs. They do free cat spay-neuter, and they have been doing this for a number of years for their city. And they have a very high reclaim rate. Now, in fairness, they only cover 2 cities. It's not like a huge county shelter with a 10 or 20,000 intake. But still, they're doing very well in their community, and these are practices that the larger shelters are starting to take on and are starting to see some improvements there as well. So let's talk about missing pet behavior. Okay, so this is something that is not understood by many, unless you've been involved with Missing Pet Partnership, because we talk about this all the time. The most important thing and the most basic thing is that missing pets will behave differently than they do at home. So if you go out, here kitty, the cat's probably not going to run up to you when they are outside of the home and they are frightened. So some questions to ask if you are counseling owners of missing pets is, are they indoor or outdoor? And because that will change how they behave. And are they shy or outgoing? This kitty here is Flossie, and Flossie lives with her owner in a Chicago apartment. She reached out to us when Flossie went missing. And she was sure that she had gotten out the window, even though she hadn't seen her get out. And she was very distraught. She'd gone all around the neighborhood, handing out flyers, talking to the businesses downstairs, but nobody had seen Flossie. And after speaking with her, I stressed that she needed to look more inside the home, inside the building, because she's an indoor cat, and they rarely wander very far. So sure enough, a couple days later, she called me back. Flossie was safely back at home. It turns out that it was hot during the summer, so folks had left their doors open into the enclosed hallway to get some airflow, and Flossie had gone across the hall and was in the landlord's apartment, hanging out in the piano. So we add that to our list of strange places where cats have been found. So the important thing to remember for all cats, but especially indoor cats, is that they are not going to be very far from home. It's not like a 2-year-old intact male husky who may have run 5 miles before you even realize he's missing. Very important to understand as well is that they may appear feral in a shelter environment. And we have seen this in our situations where folks have had to use a humane trap to catch their own cat, because when they are outside, they are so frightened that you can't just walk up and pick them up. So they've had to use a humane trap, and when you pick up that trap, boy, they're hissing, spinning, crouching in the back, looking exactly like what we would call feral. So the outdoor cat may be a little further away. They're going to have a little bit more of a territory. The important thing to remember about an outdoor cat is that if they don't show up for their 6 o'clock feeding time, or whatever their normal routine is, that something has happened. They may be stuck. They may be injured. They may have been displaced, which is typically that they've been chased by an aggressive cat or by a dog. So something has happened, and you need to figure out what has happened in order to be able to find them, especially if they are ill or injured. The shy cat. Now, I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't heard it dozens of times, and I just heard another story recently, that these cats can hide without eating or drinking for days or even weeks. It doesn't sound possible, but it actually is. Now, some of these cats who were found later died due to organ failure, but the majority of them survived with a trip to the vet and some supportive care. So this is why it's super important for people to understand if they say, oh, I've already looked around. Well, okay, you need to keep looking, because they're not going to come out, they're not going to walk out meowing, and they may actually be stuck or hiding somewhere for days or weeks and still be alive. So the outgoing cat, this is the kitty who will follow you down the street while you're out for a walk. Okay, they may actually travel from home. They may follow other people. The good thing is that if they're out and they're in trouble, they will approach people. They will look to people for help. The downside is that they are the cat that may be, quote unquote, rescued, because someone sees them and assumes they've been abandoned. So if someone takes them in for safety and tries to find the owner, that's one thing. But unfortunately, they may just take them in and keep them. So let's talk about some effective search methods. So I asked one of our associates, Kim Freeman of Lost Cat Finder. She's actually coming to Northern California to help folks with some of their cats that were displaced during the terrible fires that we've recently had. And when I asked her, what is your number one way that people find cats? Without hesitating, she said a physical search of the immediate area. So that's what it takes, not the internet, not all sorts of other things, but just exhaustively, physically searching. So I say safety first, because when people are distraught, they do foolish things. And you want to be aware of your surroundings. One woman that I was helping, the neighbor actually called the police on her because she was walking around at night looking for her cat. And people didn't know what she was doing, so they called the police. You don't want to trespass on other people's properties. We do recommend that if possible, you check the neighbor's yards and under the decks and in the bushes and things like that. But if the neighbor does not give you permission, that's all you can do is see what you can see from the street or from your yard. So getting your neighbors involved in the search is also extremely helpful. This kitty here in the picture is called Zant, and Zant actually lives not too far from me. He lives with his owner in an apartment and a couple of other cats, and we had a crazy heat wave this summer, so like everybody else, she slept with the window open. And in the morning, the screen was pushed out, Zant was gone. Other cats were still in the apartment. So she did all the right things, exhaustive physical search. There's a black cat, there's other black cats. It was challenging. So what she did was, this looks like an 8x10 flyer, but it's actually a little card that she had made at the print shop. And she handed these out to people. And she also put them under doormats and so forth around the neighborhood. And when she would get some calls or sightings, she would put more of these little cards out, figuring he's likely to be in that area. And as it turns out, he was in an area that she had not been looking in. Even though he's an indoor cat in an apartment, he had gone a couple of blocks away, and she was out looking for him, following some of the tips that she got from these cards. She looked for him, didn't see him, didn't hear him, walked back home, and that night he reappeared. So I theorize, this is not proven, but I've heard it before. I theorize that when the owner walks into an area where they haven't looked before and then walks back home, that they leave a scent trail. And the cat may have seen or heard them or been aware, but maybe not comfortable to come out at that time. And they always seem to come back at night. So I think there's something to that. So microchips, when those first came out, more than 20 years ago, we were so excited thinking they were going to solve all the problems. Unfortunately, they did not, but we still do recommend that all cats be chipped and registered. It's important for owners to understand how they work. It's not a GPS, okay? Your vet probably didn't register it for you. So very important that people have those records and that they make sure they are updated. Posters. These are the neon posters that we recommend. We call them 5 + 5 + 55, which is 5 words that people can read in 5 seconds while going 55 miles an hour. So think of those billboards alongside the freeway you're driving along. Injured in an accident? Call this lawyer. Things like that. You see it, you remember what it says, and it's easy for you to remember. Now, these tend to be used more for dogs because they travel more and they're more visible, but they can be good if you are not getting any leads on looking for your cat and you just want to get the word out. Now, some areas do have sign ordinances, so you want to be aware of that. And if there are significant restrictions, you can put them on private property, either on your lawn, in your window, or on your friend's property. So you want to think critically. You want to watch out for scams. Unfortunately, there are some terrible scams, myths, and quick fixes. Okay, this is, as we joke, this myth will send us to an early grave. We hear about this every day. Every post on Facebook, someone recommends this. Put out a dirty cat box and your cat will magically reappear. Well, wouldn't it be nice if it were that easy? But now we know, even from what we've been discussing today, that most cats are already close to home. They are just hiding because they're frightened, because they're injured, because something happened. Smelling a cat box is not an initiative for them to come home. Okay, so another myth that I hear a lot is, my cat went away to die. And the reason for this is that old cats are often found in the bushes or in the garage or something after they have passed away. The problem with this belief is that, yes, what we see in reality and in the shelters is that cats who are older, doing poorly, have kidney disease or something like that, they become disoriented. And so they hide because they're not feeling well, and they either can't find their way back home or they're too weak. So yes, they will die because they need medical attention, not because they have some human-like concept of death and they're going away to die. That's just not how animals think. So some people believe that their cat might have been killed by a wild animal. And while this certainly does happen, it's actually a lot less common than you might think. Now, there are some areas like Los Angeles, Southern California, where there's a real problem with coyotes killing and eating pets, attacking people. That's a special situation where those animals for generations have become habituated to living with people and to preying on pets. But for most of the country, it's pretty uncommon. And the reason we stress that is because people use that as an excuse to give up and stop looking. Psychics. Okay, if you believe in psychics, that's great. But the problem that we see is that when people focus only on what the psychic says, whatever that may be, they will not do the physical search. They will not go to the shelter. They will not do the other things that they need to do. And people spend a lot of money on that. And it's money better spent, maybe making some flyers or making posters. So there's another scam where people claim to have your pet and they will demand money. And this is more common with dogs, but we have seen it with cats, where the person will respond to an advertisement that they've seen for a missing pet. And sometimes they'll even threaten to harm the animal if the person doesn't send them money. And it's just awful that they would do this to people who are distraught and desperate. And so we tell people that if this happens, if someone is claiming to have your pet and demanding money and being weird, ask them to text you a picture. Everyone today has a phone, and there's no reason why they can't do that. If they can't, and if they just keep asking for money, it's just a scam. So these are some of the owner behaviors that cause a problem. So let's examine some of those. So grief avoidance is a huge problem. It depends on how bonded someone is with their pet. Some people are not that bonded. You know, they can get another pet. Okay. But for those of us who are really attached to our cats and they're part of our family, especially if someone has only one cat or that cat is, you know, very meaningful to them, they are going to be as grief-stricken as if it were a person. And they can't handle not knowing. It's that they want that closure. So the only way to stop the grief is to stop looking. And so unfortunately, we see people who really love their cat say, oh, he was probably hit by a car, or he was probably killed by a coyote, and then they stop looking. In the meantime, their cat is out there somewhere needing help, or they end up at the animal shelter weeks later, but they don't come down to look because they've already given up. Timing, as I mentioned earlier, the owner doesn't start searching right away, or they give up searching too soon. This is a huge problem, especially for cats. Lack of support, even from spouses, friends, family members. We hear a lot that people are embarrassed that they are spending so much time looking for their pet because the spouse or the people in their lives are saying, oh, just get another one. You know, it's just a cat. But of course we know that that is not true. Bad advice, okay, that cat box. And another variation on the cat box is sprinkling vacuum cleaner contents around your home outside. Now, where that came from, I have no idea, and why that would bring a cat back, but everyone's an expert, and there's no shortage of crazy advice, including that you, the owner, should urinate outside in your yard. Okay, we don't recommend that. It's unsanitary. Someone might call the police, and it certainly will not encourage your cat to come home. And the crux of this is the wasted energy that you can argue all day over certain methods, and some people really believe they work, and they're not going to change their mind. That's fine. But the danger in doing things that are ineffective is that owners have a limited amount of energy. There's that grief avoidance. When they hit that wall, they're done. And so we don't want them wasting energy when they could be putting their energy into effective search techniques. So let's talk a little bit about finders. So these are some of the behaviors of finders that prevent cats from getting back home. Okay, this is one we call finders keepers. So people really quickly get attached to an animal. We all do it. You know, shelters, kittens come in, cute animals. Oh my God, how cute they are. You feel a bond instantly. But it's not really yours. You don't know, especially if you have found the animal in your neighborhood. You don't know where that animal came from. But then we get into these beliefs, like the owner doesn't deserve to get their pet back. And we see it, oh my God, this animal is skinny. It must not be taken care of. And we've seen cases where the finder even gives the owner a hard time about reclaiming. And they have absolutely no right to do so. So there's what we call the rescuer mentality, the folks that believe that every animal needs to be rescued. And this is something that comes into play also with community cats for people who don't believe cats should be outside. Well, whether you believe one thing or the other, that's the way it is. Cats are outside, and that's never going to change. When folks find these animals believing that they're not being taken care of or they don't have an owner, they don't go to the shelter, they don't report them found. And I've seen people give animals away or adopt them out without any attempt to find the owner. And this is how you read those stories in the news that come up from time to time about animals finding their original owners from 5 or 10 years ago thanks to a microchip. And they're in some completely different area. So it means that animal was found and adopted out or given away, and nobody ever checked the chip or tried to contact the owner. And then there's just a lack of knowledge of the system. Some people really mean well, and they just don't know what to do. So they find an animal. Maybe they're not a pet owner. They don't know anything about laws or animal shelters. So they find an animal, they think it needs help, and they give it to some friend of theirs that has animals. So this is also a problem. So our motto is think lost, not stray. This is super simple and super important because we all have biases and they affect us in ways that we're not aware of. We like to believe that we're not. We like to think we're enlightened. We don't think that way, but we all have them from our upbringing, from our experiences, from the people with whom we interact. So these are some biases in animal sheltering. A cat looks unwell. They're abused. They're neglected, right? Not that they're old. I've unfortunately lost some of my older cats in the last couple of years. And the way they looked in the last 6 months of life, if someone saw them, they might have thought that I was not taking good care of them. But the fact is that they were 17 years old and had cancer. We don't know what the real story is on animals that end up stray. We believe that a fearful cat is feral, or the cats have been abandoned and dumped. People love to say that. They come out here and dump animals. Certainly it happens, but not as often as we think. This is important because words have power. Think of discrimination. Think of bullying. Words become thought, which becomes action. If we believe these cats are abandoned, dumped, abused, are we going to take the effort to look for their owners? Probably not. But when you think lost, now it's a different paradigm. You're going to make those efforts to find the owner. You're going to check the lost cat postings. You're going to search the microchip. And somebody questioned me on this. They thought it meant searching more on the body. That's part of it. But there is a process by which you can just make some more phone calls, call some more registries, call the veterinarian that implanted it. There's more you can do than just that one phone call to the primary registry. You can post a flyer where the cat was found. At one shelter, the veterinarian posted a flyer for a cat that was brought in injured in a bizarre accident where a bird watering fountain had fallen on the cat, and the cat happened to live in his neighborhood, so he posted a flyer. It was nowhere near the shelter, and the owners came down, the cat recovered and was reclaimed. And they never would have known to look at the shelter if he hadn't posted that flyer. So now I'm going to talk about a few steps that we can take to remove those barriers. So manage intake. This is one of the initiatives of the Million Cat Challenge, so you may know about this already. But if not, it's a very interesting and complex topic, and it's been very interesting when I've discussed this in areas that not only aren't doing it, but have never heard of it, the response that I get. So I don't know who you are out in the audience, if this is something you're already doing, if it's an idea you embrace, or something you've never heard of, or don't think is a good idea. So these things are all up for discussion. The main thing that people tend to say is, we are open admission, so we can't do that. But if you ask 5 people what that means, they'll give you 5 different answers. And the truth is that every shelter is doing some kind of management of their intake. You're not simply taking every animal and helping every person who comes in the door. The logic of managed admission is that you are taking in cats who need your help, underage kittens, animals that are sick or injured, and you're also engaging the public in those solutions. So if you have underage kittens, you're getting people to find the mom. You're getting people to foster. So you're not just letting people drop off cats, and then suddenly you're buried in cats. So it's very important to look at the laws. That's another thing I hear a lot, is that, oh, we can't do that because the law requires us. Okay, well, what does the law actually say? It's very interesting to look at those ordinances that people believe require them to take cats. Even if it does say something like that, A, there's always a workaround. B, you get to decide the process by which you follow the mandate. And C, laws can be changed. And cities and counties, the leaders in those agencies, are not dumb. They understand that you in the shelter are the experts, and you're the ones who have to follow these mandates and serve the public. So it's up to you to create the process, to go to your leadership and say, this is how we're going to do it, because the way we're doing it isn't working. The majority of cats that we have seen recovered match the studies that we have done, that they are found very close to home. This kitty in the picture here is Noodles, who was picked up by someone who thought she was sick and brought her to the shelter. Turns out she was just old. But the owners, by some miracle, they knew where the shelter was, and they reclaimed her the next day. She was one of the 2%. And as it turns out, she was sitting in front of her own house. So she was never lost. A study done back in 2007 showed that 93% of cats returned home on their own, and only 7% in that particular study were recovered from an animal shelter. So we know this. They're more likely to go back home or be found in the community. And this frees up resources for the cats that are truly in need. And it keeps your population at a healthy level, capacity for care. It's extremely important for the health and welfare of the cats and of your staff. Posting cats online. Now, the internet it's a double-edged sword. We do find that we get many owner reclaims through the internet, but people have also become a little too reliant on it. They believe that if they post something on Facebook, that's all they have to do. Well, it's not. But it is important, especially in the shelters, to post the pictures of all the animals that you have. And there are still some shelters that do not. For whatever reason, they believe people will steal animals, or they think, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me today, but this is something that is very important, especially for cats. Because if your black cat is picked up and taken to a shelter 25 miles away, how are you going to know it's there? So I'm going to show you a snapshot of 2 Pet Harbor listings. I've removed the name because I'm not trying to shame anyone. I'm just giving an example of effective and not so effective. So I want you to tell me, which one do you believe would be more helpful if you were looking for a missing cat? Okay, so here's shelter 1. Not a lot of information there, is there? No picture, no location found, no gender. Shelter 2, Okay, there's a picture. It's the intake picture. It's not that great, but you can see the face, you can see the colors, and there is also a location where the cat was found. And Pet Harbor can be customized, so talk to your tech people about doing that. You can change those categories, and you can have a little bit more information there for your people. Okay, and I've had folks say they don't have time to take a photo. Well, that's like saying there's no time to vaccinate. And unfortunately, there are shelters that are also delaying vaccination, and they are surprised when year after year they have outbreaks. So it needs to be part of the process. Okay, posting on Facebook, again, not the only answer, but it's great to at least post a daily sample so that people know you house found pets. Okay, so step 3, educating your public. Like we talked a little bit earlier about the missing cat behaviors. It's very important to have staff, volunteers, whoever mans your lost and found area to work with the public, because it's like being in a car accident. All of a sudden you have all these things to deal with, and it's not something that you've done before, and you're grieving and you're upset, and now you have all these problems, and to expect someone to know exactly what to do in that situation is unrealistic. So it's just a combination of all of these things that compound to decrease those chances of reunion. We're super excited about the missing cat study that we did with the University of Queensland School of Veterinary Science. And Dr. Jackie Rand, who was the head of that study, did a presentation on this at a recent conference in Australia for the Getting to Zero organization. And the study should be published in a journal very soon. The preliminary results are showing some of the things that we believed anecdotally, which are that cats are found close to home. So there's a lot of other interesting information about how people are missing their cats, how they're looking for them, and how they are finding them. So we'll be excited to share that information with you here very soon. You also want to engage volunteers. There are a lot of people out there who want to volunteer, and they may not necessarily want to pet cats or walk dogs. So these are folks who can help people through that process, through that sea of people who come in the door every day looking for a missing pet. Okay, they can provide support to those people, because very often when we counsel folks on their missing pet cases, it's not some specific thing we told them that caused them to find their pet, but they say later that just talking to you, I didn't give up hope. I didn't stop looking. I didn't stop going to the shelter. It's giving people hope, and that it can be the most important ingredient to their success. So our goal is to have teams of missing pet consultants in every community, at least in every state. That would be a start. And this is important because we can counsel anybody on the phone on missing pet behavior, on effective search techniques, and things like that. But it's very important for folks in those communities who understand the demographics, the weather, the terrain. I would know what to tell someone about Northern California, but I wouldn't know to start about somewhere in Texas or Georgia. But if you live there, you'll be able to say, oh, yeah, these are the shelters that you need to go to, and this is where you need to look. And the weather will affect the very hot weather in Arizona, the very cold weather in some other parts of the country. So these folks will counsel people over the phone, online, or in person, if feasible, whether from home or from a shelter. So these are some of the things that these volunteers can do. They can assist owners with the physical searches, if that's possible. They can also post signs and distribute flyers, because what we find is that many people want to do these things, but they don't get around to it. You tell them to make a poster, they don't. You give them a flyer, they don't hang it up. It's not that they don't care, it's just that they're distraught and overwhelmed. If they only have someone to help them, even just a little bit, and some people can't. Some people are physically disabled, they're elderly, they don't have transportation. So all of those people need help. They can also give lost pet tours. They can assist with filling out the lost reports and cross-checking those reports. Because we know in most shelters, those reports go in a binder where they stay forever and ever, and no one ever checks them. They can also hand out recovery tips. We're excited to see shelters creating these lists that they can hand out of tips on how to look for your missing pet. And here's the other shelters you need to call, and here's the veterinarian you need to call. So the bottom line is, if you make it a priority, it's a win-win. And that's what Pink Kitty has to say about this. So you are welcome to contact me anytime at my email. I am happy to talk to you about this, and at this time we can take some questions, or if you're watching the recorded version, you're welcome to follow up with me at a later time.
Thank you so much for that presentation. So many wonderful tidbits in there, a lot of things I didn't know, quite a few points you made help me clarify some things I didn't understand. Wonderful presentation. We have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to jump right into questions here. First question we have is, how are you finding neighborhood network sites like Nextdoor playing a role in finding missing and lost pets?
Well, we're finding that Nextdoor is much more effective than Facebook and other internet options because it's hyper-local.
Right.
So it can be very effective, and it's mostly neighbors talking to neighbors and helping each other, which is so important.
Especially since, as you mentioned, those cats are so often close to home, so if anybody's going to run into them or see them, it's your neighbors.
Exactly.
So interesting, such a great use of volunteer talent as well that you mentioned. Some shelters have a time requirement, 3 hours, 5 hours that you have to have a week that you're willing to be trained. But for those volunteers who maybe can't come in and be in the shelter once a week, what a great use of their volunteer time. I hadn't thought of that either.
Exactly, and these are...
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go on. These are things that volunteers can do either at the shelter or from home, depending on the situation.
How does that work then? Do you route the calls to the volunteers, or here's a list of people who have called, and can you give them a ring and help them post online and do those sorts of things?
Exactly, yes. There can be a hotline, just like some shelters have a behavior hotline with volunteers who assist with those calls.
Right.
Brigid, this is Kate with a follow-up question that relates those two. I often stock my own Nextdoor.com and respond to lost pet listings. Have you encountered a shelter that uses volunteers to stalk their specific Nextdoor.coms and communicate with people about lost and found pets?
Yes, I have heard of shelters. I want to say it's San Diego County and some others where volunteers are actually posting and communicating with folks on Nextdoor. So it's not automated, it's being done by volunteers. But that's been very helpful because it's very time consuming, especially for a large area like that.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, our question is, I've had folks lose their cat when they first moved to the house. That's quite common, isn't it? So the cat is unfamiliar with the scents, etc. Would they still be likely to be close as with an indoor cat?
Yes, and even though we heard the stories of animals walking 100 miles across the country to be reunited home, that's actually extremely rare. We have seen even cases where cats had just moved to the house and became lost. One of the kitties in my slides, the black long-haired kitty named Squeakers, she was exactly that type of situation where the owner was bringing her from another location, and she got out of the car upon arrival, had never been to that location before. And she not only stayed close by, she stayed on the property. She was hanging out with some other cats in the area, and she eventually was able to catch her with a humane trap.
Next question is, how do you empower the community to help find the owner of the cat they have found? So switching roles, how do we find the owner?
Well, I think it's important first for people to understand that cats are probably not abandoned or dumped, that certainly if they look unwell or need medical attention, that it's a good thing for them to pick up the cat, take them to a vet or a shelter, and seek that help that they may need. But it's also important for those folks to start talking to their neighbors, whether it's posting on Nextdoor, whether it's putting up a sign, or maybe even just putting some flyers at the neighbor's door within a block or two radius, because as we know, they usually haven't gone very far. And I've seen this also on Nextdoor, where someone has said they haven't seen their cat, and someone literally a few houses down has said, well, he's been hanging out and eating at my house.
Right.
So, so this definitely does happen. So it's just for people to understand that there may be an owner out there and that they probably aren't too far away.
Right. In Illinois, counties have to register dogs and get rabies shots for dogs, not cats. Some animal control agencies think cats should be registered and get rabies vaccinations too. But I'm afraid of a mandatory registration would increase the cost of reclaiming and keeping a cat. Do you have such mandatory state laws?
Well, rabies are required in California, and I believe that's pretty much across the board in the United States, that rabies shots are required for animals of a certain age. However, we have not seen that laws or that mandatory registration has been effective in increasing missing pets. And this gets into something we don't have time to talk about it in detail, but licensing was originally created to show proof of rabies and for identification. But now we have other ways of doing that, such as microchipping and other forms of identification. So we haven't found that it has been helpful. And you can mandate anything you want. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. Like communities with mandatory microchipping don't have any better owner reclaim rates than other communities. So it's making identification and vaccination and whatever else people need affordable and accessible rather than mandating.
Yep. Our next question is, how do you feel about the orange, in quotes, kitty convict collar? And what about green or yellow for indoor-outdoor?
Well, I personally am not a fan of cat collars because I have seen injuries. Not anecdotally, I have seen some pretty serious injuries, even from the breakaway kind. And if they are the proper breakaway kind, the cats tend to lose them in a day. So I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't do that if it's working for them. But I think most people don't know anything about animal welfare in shelters to begin with, and they're not going to know about the orange collar. It's not going to be that big of a thing that people outside of our circle would understand what it means.
Yep.
Yeah.
So speaking of our circle, you have so many good tidbits in here, starting with just basic information like when you're making a sign, the 555 rule. Is there a place where I can go to download some of these things, or where you've created them for public consumption so I can talk to people who are missing their pet and guide them on some of the things you've shared with us today?
Yes, you can go to our website, and we actually are just putting the finishing touches on our new mobile-friendly website, which can be found at missingpetpartnership.info.
Okay, perfect. And some of the tidbits you've shared with us today, they're ready there to be downloaded so we can share them with the public.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all this information today. Thank you for walking us through and giving us so many great tips. I certainly learned a lot, and I know a lot of other folks did as well. And we appreciate your time today.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. If you have not already joined the Million Cat Challenge, please visit the website, www.millioncatchallenge.org, to find out more information and learn how you can be part of this amazing volume there really quick, this amazing campaign. Thank you for your time today. And if you are not still with us live, we will be emailing this out, a link that you can join and re-listen at your convenience. Have a good day, everybody.